Something that the ancient alien theorists often mess up with is the old issue of mixing the planes, or the new issue of the research into psychedelics. By that, I don't necessarily mean drug use, but the experience of the mind. So, a lot of that will be ignored. And what do they mean by angels? What do they mean by the divine? It means a whole lot of things to different people. Angels could be anything from a prostitute to a light being to a fire being. Some languages actually lay out the difference in between the two. And is it really just some progression to monotheism of something that wasn't there before? Now, I do take the point that things have been mixed into it. The Bible is a collection of books, and from the very start, it's pulling off of Sumerian things. But one thing that I do agree with Zecharia Sitchin that makes sense is, what if Aleph, A, was the first letter in the Bible? What would happen? The first verse makes the whole thing, or at least what the intention of the whole Bible, make a lot more sense. And what does that make it say? It says, the provider of the beginning, I'm doing my own translation, by the way, the provider of the beginning created what people think are gods, the heavens and the earth. And I personally subscribe to that, because even the order, the idea that the light beings and the fire beings have gender just like the humans, the Anunnaki, after the first generation is, 5 generations of Anunnaki, I guess. Well, if we're going to see them as spiritual beings. And there's, if Mul means the stars, maybe the circumcision of the Israelites was just a linguistic misunderstanding. They were supposed to show themselves as identified with the stars somehow. They didn't have to cut a third of the thing off, or, but the monotheism, it wasn't just a henotheism, you believe there are other gods, and it was unique. So you have to look at Yahweh in one of two ways, if you're going to look at it as something maybe real, is that it's of the same class as all these other things that, there's hundreds of beings, like the 360 at one point, and, the archons, or what people would call them. You have to either say that it's the word for God, Ningushita, Marduk, Yahweh, Ra, Thoth, a bunch of the other ideas were all the same. And it's something different than the rest. Or you have to say it's the same as the rest. And the Great Theophany. What's the Great Theophany? No, it wasn't nuclear war. This ancient alien people, they need physical evidence to say, when they say there was some sort of nuclear event, because we know about comets and all this other stuff. So something happened there in the past couple 100,000 years. Scientific studies would have shown that stuff. But let me define in my own way. I have mentioned the terms of the planes. You got the physical plane and the various psychic planes. People would call the psychic planes the astral, the mental, the astral, the causal, the mental, the etheric. That's all that's metaphysics in terms of your psychology. And then the soul plane, so, those 3 levels. But in terms of encountering something else, the epiphany, the realization as a human being, my experience that I shared at Multnomah Falls, where I knew I had a soul. I knew I was the soul operating this body. And anyways, so that's an epiphany. I've had other epiphanies. But it's not just some, oh, I figured something out, eureka. But eureka with a big capital, you know. And then comes the hierophany, and that's your typical thing. Yes, he goes into the idea that maybe they're robots, maybe they're not all human, that these things have encountered. If there's a physical thing going on, yeah, that makes sense to a degree. But do these beings from other planets, if there are beings from other planets that are capable of visiting us, or us communicating with them somehow, at least to the extent that we can communicate with some small animal, I mean, like a bug or something. But so sort of a priest. So these beings encounter, talk to God, or communicate, or intermediaries in terms of communication, not in terms of worship. I'm not advocating that. I don't think the light beings are really supportive of that sort of thing, and some of the fire beings don't care either. And then there's a theophany, the direct encounter of God. Now, some things that you find in one group of mythology and another group of mythology, they're going to line up to the point where you say, could this be the same thing? Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. But the greatest theophany is seen in terms of as many as 600,000 Israelites. It was probably more than several thousand or something. To the fact that the earth changed. The earth changed. That blackened mountaintop, that was really weird. But it's not a nuclear event, but it's definitely had those mysterious tablets of Meh. Meh means action, M-E. So could be in terms of commands, and that makes sense. Is Alam. I mean, why is there so many words for eternity? If Alam could be a place, but if God's God of everything, then that, is Nibiru. Again, very fundamentalist. Oh, I read something, but he tries to work all the mythologies into one sort of Judeo-Christian mythology, but he's wrong in terms of symbols meaning only one thing. They mean a lot of different things. The crescent and the star isn't actually an Islamic symbol. It was something that the early Quran followers saw on the flags of the enemies that they fought. So if you want to be anti-Islamic Satanist or something like that, then you might use that symbol. But it doesn't necessarily mean a moon god or something like that when somebody who's Muslim, wants to use the symbol. And he mentions the whole Twilight Zone thing in terms of events that switch the, unexpected. They change life or direct life in an unexpected way. Are there ways to have these states? Certainly in terms of the psychedelic, both in the sensual and the visual and, what happens in your body. The spiritual, whether it's the light being realm or the fire being realm or the way we directly understand God or directly encounter God, that may involve the choice of those beings at hand. And some of these experiences that the sages and mystics and prophets have had, they aren't noticed by the person next to them. But we're not saying that, this is not a pedestal made of some sort of wood and painted and all that. It's, it's not forming different opinions of the physical reality, because there's a difference between schizophrenia and spiritual awareness. And and there's the night, the Gaguna, and what brings about immortality. Why do some people to this day live so long? So the nighttime house, very important to Egyptian mythologies. What happens at night parallels the afterlife. There's also things that you're not quite experiencing in your outer physical life that come into your spiritual experiences and beings that can feed off of us in a sexual or a psychic way or some other sorts of things like that. But yeah, there's the Gilgamesh, and what do forms of the Huwawa and other such things mean? Why a confusion of languages, and how could have such a thing happened? Yes, the deluge, and were they called fallen ones, the Nephilim? Were they called this because they were, you know, of another race or another subspecies of human? Or were they spirits in themselves and had no physical reality as such? Why is paradise, why can't we return to paradise? Why, what formed the first encounters? Did the humans do something for them? Are we reworking the myths? What can these myths do for us? Yeah, there's just a lot of interesting things to think about. But I am not seeing any question here, so I am going to quit for the time being. But feel free to ask questions and make comments, whether or not you agree with what I have to say. But don't lose hope in having your own experience of authentication in this or some other matter, or forming your own theories based on the facts of these things at hand here. And we would have to say, yes, God is an alien, if you're going to use those definitions, because obviously a God would not be from this world, or not be bound in terms of this world. But that doesn't mean that God has to be aloof 3,500 years travel away, or 3,600 years, or the Nibiru. There may be a planet out there, but there's not the evidence that it's something like Zecharia Sitchin says, that the aliens show up and they live immensely long lives of millions of years, Ptah ruling them, or Enki, Enlil, whatever you want to call them. I don't. I would call them usurpers. I would call them demiurges, not real creators, but counter creators. Stay tuned for my drama for the equinox.